Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker on an unprecedented and historic day in Washington, where a face-to-face meeting between President Trump and Ukraine's President Zelenskyy in the Oval Office turned combative and confrontational. Zelenskyy left the White House without signing the deal to give the U.S. access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals and without holding the planned joint press conference with President Trump. The White House says they told Ukrainian officials that President Zelenskyy needed to leave the White House and return when he is ready for peace. It was a truly extraordinary moment in the Oval Office, spiraling into a shouting match with Vice President Vance berating President Zelenskyy for not being more grateful and President Trump threatening to abandon Ukraine. Here's some of what happened during that heated exchange in the Oval Office.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring an end to this conflict. Do you think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America and attack the administration that is trying to prevent the destruction of your country?
A lot of questions. Let's start from the beginning.
Sure.
First of all, during the war, everybody has problems. Even you, but you have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's exactly what you're doing.
You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influence.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influence.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. That's back to you. Far more than a lot of people said they should have.
Have you said thank you once? This entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you? You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Your country's in big trouble. Wait a minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning. You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us. If you didn't have our military equipment, this war would have been over in 2 weeks.
In 3 days. I heard it from Putin. In 3 days. This is something
maybe
new.
Less.
In 2 weeks. Of course, yes.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this.
Again, just say thank you.
I said a lot of times to American people.
Accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong.
The confrontation shocking even some people in the Oval Office. A photographer in the room capturing this moment of Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S. with her head in her hands. Shortly after, President Trump called off the rest of President Zelenskyy's visit. After leaving the White House, President Zelenskyy posted on X thanking the U.S. and the White House for the meeting, adding that he will continue to work towards a just and lasting peace for Ukraine. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, who's been a longtime supporter of sending aid to Ukraine, spoke to reporters outside the White House late this afternoon and called the meeting a complete and utter disaster and suggested President Zelenskyy should resign, saying, quote, "I don't know if we can ever do business with him again." So right now, a day that was supposed to move the peace process forward may have done exactly the opposite. And now major questions remain about where the United States-Ukraine relationship goes from here. Joining me now is our team of reporters, NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor, NBC News Chief Foreign Correspondent Richard Engel, and NBC News Senior National Security Correspondent Courtney Kube. Thanks to all of you for starting us off on this monumental day. Yamiche, let me go to you. What are administration officials telling you about how this Oval Office meeting erupted and devolved into this disaster.
Well, Kristen, this really was a rare, testy, and extraordinary exchange between the president of Ukraine and President Trump. After those cameras left and we saw all of that confrontation happen, President Trump huddled with White House advisors and decided that he wanted President Zelenskyy to be shown the door and leave the White House, canceling the press conference, canceling any sort of signing that would have happened on that rare earth minerals agreement. It was Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and the National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, who delivered that message to President Zelenskyy and Ukrainian officials, telling them that they needed to leave. I am being told by White House officials that Ukrainian officials were pushing for a reset, that they wanted to stay. That, of course, is the White House's take. We're still waiting for Ukrainian officials to say what they were thinking. The point is that everything was canceled and that Zelenskyy left the White House. In the meantime, President Trump took to online explaining that he believed President Zelenskyy was not ready for peace and that he could come back when he was ready. White House officials tell me there is absolutely no chance that President Zelenskyy will be welcomed back to the White House today. They're leaving open maybe the possibility that they could talk to him in the future. But as you said, Senator Lindsey Graham is saying that President Zelenskyy might not be someone that the White House could ever work with again. So very, very hard to see how President Trump and President Zelenskyy get on the same page to have another meeting, but really a remarkable day at the White House.
It really was, Yamiche. There's no other way to say it. Richard Engel, I want to go to you now and keep everyone in place. We'll kind of go around the horn here. Richard, I've been covering the White House since the first Obama administration. I have never seen anything like this. Talk about how unprecedented this is and what is the reaction? What are Ukrainians telling you about the potential implications for peace?
So this was a disaster for Ukraine. You've used that word several times in the broadcast so far. Disaster, disaster, disaster. It was a disaster for Ukraine because Ukrainians were very nervous about this visit. They were very nervous about this rare earth mineral deal. They were already feeling that President Trump has been siding with President Putin, that his heart is with Russia, that he doesn't have much interest in backing Ukraine, that he's been trying mostly to recoup past monies and trying to shunt this problem off to Europe. Finally, the meeting happened. Like I said, many Ukrainians were nervous that President Zelenskyy was effectively being summoned to the White House to sign a deal that would give President Trump this mineral deal that potentially could cost hundreds of billions of dollars. And Zelenskyy kept chiming in that he wants security guarantees, that he wants more, that he thinks it's important to make sure that Vladimir Putin is not in a position to invade again. And as he kept pushing that line, you saw him come under attack from J.D. Vance, who said, effectively, you don't get it. It's the other way around. You're supposed to be here to sign, to say thank you, and to move on and not keep bringing up this issue of the security guarantees. And you just played out how it devolved. It escalated with Zelenskyy being berated first and being shouted down first by Vance and then by President Trump. At home in Ukraine, people are thinking that right now they don't have a friend in the White House. And I think this could represent a definitive shift where President Zelenskyy and President Trump are now perceived to be enemies, where President Trump is treating President Zelenskyy like he is the enemy. And this issue of appreciation, by the way, is very significant for Ukrainians because at the White House, you saw President Trump and Vice President Vance stressing that President Zelenskyy is not appreciative enough, that he should be there, accepting his weak position, admitting effectively that he is powerless. He refused to do that, and that set the White House off. I think this is the beginning of a very difficult chapter for Ukraine. And frankly, before you continue with your whip around, other countries are watching. Other allies are watching what happened when an ally in need went to the United States to sign a deal that President Trump wanted to sign, and when he didn't express the proper amount of appreciation. He didn't keep his mouth shut and just nod. He was thrown out, and the deal is now potentially off the table, and President Trump now could be treating him like an adversary going forward. Other allies are watching that and clearly imagining that they could be next, that next time they are in a time of need, that they could be in that chair in the Oval Office being told that they're not appreciative, being told to quiet down and to get out of town if they don't like what they're being told. A very blunt, brutal display of American politics that is bad for Ukraine, certainly, and has many in Europe very concerned. The Prime Minister of Estonia just said the free world needs a new leader.
It's incredibly powerful, and I'm so glad you make that point, Richard, because I do think one of the big questions looming over that display, that exchange, that eruption of anger in the Oval Office is what it will mean, how it will potentially scramble the United States alliances around the world. Courtney, Kube, let me go to you now. What is the reaction within the national security world? What are the potential implications?
So, Kristen, there's two very distinct reactions that we're seeing here today. And frankly, they fall on party lines, political lines. So some of the MAGA people here and the political people here in the Pentagon are praising this and saying that this is an example of America first on the world stage. President Trump, Vice President Vance showing strength, showing President Zelenskyy that the United States is going to stand their ground for their beliefs. The other side, which I will say is the majority of the people I have spoken with today anyway, are very concerned about the implications of this. Now, the United States has been sending weapons and equipment to Ukraine for more than 3 years now to help them fight off the Russian advances, the Russian full-scale invasion that just the third year anniversary of that just days ago. And that has been something that the Pentagon and the military have been in favor of. They have been very proud of their ability to flow these weapons into the war zone very quickly. It's been a monumental logistical effort that they have been able to send billions of dollars of weapons and equipment into Ukraine. And the military members and military leaders, frankly, who we speak with about that, are proud of the fact that they've been able to help Ukraine, who was, to call them the underdog in February of 2022 is an understatement. And yet there they are still continuing to fight off the Russian advances in the east and down towards the south. So that side, they are very concerned about it. I think from a larger strategic view from the U.S. military, the reality is this Pentagon and this leadership here have made it very clear that they are intent on withdrawing the U.S. from the positions that we have in Europe. We don't know what that looks like. We don't know how widespread it's going to be. But Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, Vice President Vance, even the president have talked about how the Europe needs to take more of its own responsibility for the defense of Europe. That includes Ukraine, because the United States, while they will continue to be committed to their partnerships and to NATO, that is going to be more of a commitment in name and less of a commitment in action going forward. They have made that clear on the world stage for the last several weeks, Kristen.
It's such an important point, Court, and the fact that President Trump continues to hammer that point home in all of these foreign leader meetings he's had with the President of France, the Prime Minister of the UK just yesterday. Richard, let me go back to you and let's talk about where this goes from here. I want to play you some of what President Trump said yesterday about peace deal talks.
We're working very hard to get that war brought to an end. I think we've made a lot of progress. I think it's moving along pretty rapidly. And I want to thank all of the people that are here that have been working on it. And we'll let you know what happens. It'll either be fairly soon or it won't be at all.
Richard, of course, all of that comes after the president referred to Zelenskyy as a dictator after he blamed Ukraine falsely for starting the war. Of course, Russia started the war and invaded Ukraine. At this point, can this relationship be repaired, Richard? What do you anticipate happening?
It really depends on what we just saw. Did we see an emotional outburst by big personalities Or was this an ambush? Was this pre-planned? Did Vance go in there as an agent provocateur and try and provoke Zelenskyy, and then Zelenskyy took the bait? Was it that, or was it a situation that just spiraled out of control? If it spiraled out of control and it was an ugly, heated argument, then it is possible that they reconcile, that there's some meeting, a bearing of the hatchet. But it didn't sound like that. It sounded like there were a lot of previous issues that were involved here as well. A lot of water under the bridge. You saw J.D. Vance, who's never been a supporter of sending money to Ukraine or backing the cause in any particular way. You saw what seemed to be, I don't want to say a premeditated attack, but there seemed to be a lot that came out that didn't have to do with the peace deal, or it has to do with minerals. You saw J.D. Vance clearly angry that President Zelenskyy, he said, had been campaigning for the opposition, campaigning for the Democrats in Pennsylvania. You heard President Trump talk about how Vladimir Putin and he both had to suffer through what he describes as Russiagate and showing solidarity with Putin. It's like he's building that same case again. Ukraine started this war. It's Ukraine's fault. Poor Vladimir Putin, who had to go through Russiagate and be insulted just like Donald Trump was. And Ukraine isn't expressing enough appreciation that the U.S. helped them out. He said to Zelenskyy, I empowered you to be a tough guy, like it was him personally who created the persona of Vladimir Zelenskyy. To other people around the world, they saw Zelenskyy just stand up to President Trump and Vice President Vance in the White House, in a foreign language, in the Oval Office, which is something that is not easy to do.
Well, fantastic reporting and analysis around this extraordinary event that unfolded in the Oval Office just a short time ago. So thank you all for starting us off, Richard, Yamiche, and Courtney. Joining me now to keep the conversation going is former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul. He's also an NBC News International Affairs analyst. Ambassador, thank you for joining us on this hugely significant day. What are your takeaways? What are the implications from your perspective of what we just witnessed?
Well, first, as an American, this was a tragic, sad day. This should not happen in the Oval Office. We should not be berating people that are fighting to save their country. It just got off the rails. It's unfortunate because it could have been a great day. This minerals deal was a good for both sides. I know that the Ukrainian side was looking forward to signing it. And the bottom line is that this does not serve America's national security interests. Let's leave aside Ukraine. It is not in our interests to do things that help Vladimir Putin. And that's what we saw today. This is a gift to Vladimir Putin, the dictator of Russia, who for the first time since 1945 launched a full-scale war complete with annexation in Europe. That is not in our national interest to be on that side. And I hope, to your question about implications, that the diplomats can get involved here. I did diplomacy. I did White House sprays. As you know, you don't do diplomacy in front of the press in the Oval Office. That's just diplomacy 101. Get behind closed doors and start talking. And number two, Secretary Rubio now has to start to do his job. We need him to get this back on track. And we need him to do that for America's national interests.
Well, to that point, Ambassador, can you just help put this into context? Because it's not hard to imagine tempers flaring behind closed doors. Yep. But I've covered the administration going back to the first Obama administration. I can't remember anything that comes close to approaching this level of intensity. Is that accurate? How do you see this? And talk about the divide and why it's important that if tempers are going to flare, they do so behind closed doors.
Well, you're exactly right. To the best of my knowledge, too, I've never seen anything like this. It's a mistake. I want to underscore, blame both sides if we have to. But I did work at the White House, right? I organized these sprays. I organized the talking points. I wrote the talking points for President Obama. Trump needs some staff here. This is not, he just loves to riff. And when he riffs, we don't have time to go through it all, but he just says things that are not true all the time. $350 billion. Putin's not responsible for this. There was no war on my watch. There was a war in Ukraine for the entire time that President Trump was the president of the United States. He forgets the war started in 2014, escalated in 2022. But the main point is we've got to get this back on track because it's not in our interest to have a blow up with Ukraine. We're alienating all of our allies in Europe. We're making all of our partners around the world nervous. I mean, think if you're Taiwan right now watching this, what does that mean for them? We've got to get this back on track, and we got to get behind closed doors. I've had explosions like this with Russians in negotiations, but they weren't with cameras on. And we've got to get this back on track.
Well, you take me to my next point, Ambassador. I want to play an exchange. This was from the end of that Oval Office spray. This was about Vladimir Putin. Listen, and I'll get your reaction on the other side.
All I can say is this. He might have broken deals with Obama and Bush, and he might have broken them with Biden. He did, maybe. Maybe he didn't. I don't know what happened. But he didn't break them with me. He wants to make a deal. I don't know if you can make a deal. The problem is, I've empowered you to be a tough guy. And I don't think you'd be a tough guy without the United States. And your people are very brave. But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out.
Ambassador, what are the potential ramifications of President Trump arguing, yes, Putin's broken deals before, but he doesn't think he will with him? You obviously are someone who's quite familiar with Vladimir Putin. What do you make of that?
So there are two, and I'll be diplomatically and generous, two misstatements that the president just made, just in that clip. Number one, what deal is he talking about that he negotiated with Vladimir Putin? He didn't do any deals. A new START agreement? Did he do a deal? No. Did he do a deal on Iran? No. Did he do a big trade deal with Putin? No. Did he end the war in Ukraine that we're fighting in eastern Ukraine for his entire presidency? No. So this myth that he's some big deal maker, maybe he was in New York, I don't know his history there, and maybe these kind of tactics work, when you're doing real estate deals, but there was no deal to be broken because he didn't achieve any deal with Vladimir Putin. Number two, when he says that we made President Zelenskyy a tough guy, he's partly right. The United States gave President Zelenskyy and his warriors the means to fight to stop Putin's invasion where they're at today. It is a miracle, by the way, that they're where they're at today and not occupying all of Ukraine. But let's be very clear about that. President Trump didn't do that. President Trump and his party delayed assistance for 6 months while Zelensky's soldiers were slaughtered on the battlefield. The Senator Vance, sitting in that room wanting some praise for President Zelenskyy, he voted against that aid package. That is a fact, everyone. Google it. And right now, they're not proposing new cards for President Zelenskyy to play. They're not proposing a new package that would help to create the permissive conditions for a negotiation. So I hope they rethink their negotiating strategy, because right now they're just giving Putin everything he wants and getting nothing in return for our national interests.
Ambassador McFaul, thank you so very much for joining us on this historic day. As always, we really appreciate your insights. Joining me now is Democratic Senator Jack Reed of Rhode Island. He is the ranking member on the Senate Armed Services Committee and has met with President Zelenskyy in Washington and in Kyiv. Senator, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I want to start by getting your reaction to the extraordinary turn of events today in the Oval Office.
Well, as Richard suggested, this was a calculated political ambush. I don't think this was a accidental interchange that escalated. This was calculated, and it was a shameful display of the lack of leadership of the Trump administration. The president did essentially what he did with regard to the Taliban. He surrendered. He did that in Doha. He did that without the participation of the Afghan government. And he gave everything the Taliban wanted and even more, and he's doing the same thing again. So his deal-making is not quite up to the demands of international diplomacy, and it was a terrible day for the United States. There are some on the other side that's talking about America first. No, this is America alone. And the basis of our national security since World War II has been a alliance network that has strengthened us, made us more powerful, and he's basically walking away from that.
You talk about the America First perspective. Let me get your reaction to what some of your Republican colleagues are saying. Utah Senator Mike Lee, quote, "Thank you for standing up for our country and putting America first, President Trump and Vice President Vance." Indiana's Jim Banks, "Zelenskyy ungratefully expects us to bankroll and escalate another forever war, all while disrespecting the president. The entitlement is insulting to working Americans." How do you respond to that?
Well, if you run the tape back again, the verbal fireworks began with Vice President Vance, and I think probably in a calculated way. And we have been supporting Ukraine along with our allies across the globe, particularly in Europe. But the Ukrainians have been fighting 46,000 casualties or more. But I think those are soldiers killed in action. But we're in a situation where everyone thought when the Russians came across the border, Zelenskyy would flee. And he said, no, don't give me a car, give me ammo. I'm going to fight these guys. And his fight is our fight. It's about freedom versus authoritarianism. It's about a world which sovereign nations can feel that they are not threatened by authoritarian regimes. So all of this apologizing by the Republicans doesn't, I think, eliminate the facts on the ground. We just effectively, in all respects, surrendered to Putin.
Senator, really powerful words there. I want to get your sense, given what you're saying, of where things stand now, and if you think it's possible to get these talks, which hadn't even started, the possibility of talks, back on track. The Ukrainians were supposed to sign an agreement to give the U.S. 50% access to its rare earth minerals. That didn't get done today. Do you think it's possible to get these discussions back on track?
I hope so, but the conduct of the president and the vice president was dismissive, not encouraging. Frankly, as many have pointed out, if this discussion, as heated as it was, took place behind closed doors, and then the three came out and said, you know, we're still working, we want to ensure that there is a peaceful solution, that would be a very positive sign, but that didn't happen. This is very discouraging, not only for the Ukrainians, but for our allies and our adversaries. Not discouraging, I think they're encouraged, because if you're China looking across the ocean at the United States, you probably feel a little more powerful at this moment, because we don't seem to be standing up for what we say we believe in and who we say are our allies.
Senator Lindsey Graham told reporters outside of the White House today that President Zelenskyy may need to step down if there's ever going to be a deal. Do you think that's the case? What's your reaction to your colleague, Senator Lindsey Graham?
Well, I think, again, without President Zelenskyy, the Ukrainian government could have collapsed within the first day or two of the invasion. He has fought with tenacity. He has faced difficult challenges, and he continues to have the support of the people of Ukraine. They will not give up the fight. And he is trying to communicate that to the president. This is the feeling, I think, that I see emanating not just from President Zelenskyy, but from the people of Ukraine. And stepping down will not make a difference. It will not cause the Ukrainian people to say, that's fine, we will subjugate it to the Russians, we like to be serfs of the Russians, etc. That's nonsense.
Senator, let me play you a little bit more of what we saw and heard today in the Oval Office. Take a look.
Let me tell you, Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt where they used him and Russia. You ever hear of that deal? That was a phony Hunter Biden, Joe Biden scam. Hillary Clinton, Shifty Adam Schiff. It was a Democrat scam. And he had to go through that. And he did go through it. We didn't end up in a war. And he went through it. He was accused of all that stuff. He had nothing to do with it.
course, U.S. intelligence did determine that Putin was trying to meddle in the U.S. election. But, Senator, what do you make of him bringing up those old grievances and those comments almost seeming to defend Vladimir Putin?
Well, I'm not surprised that he's defending Putin. As you recall, when he was president in his first term, he, I think, went out of his way to facilitate Putin and to essentially to genuflect before Putin. It's suggesting that that situation was something that was just made up is nonsense. That he was impeached by the House and he was not convicted by the Senate, but there was a serious breach, I believe, of a policy and law.
Senator, very quickly before I let you go, should Ukraine still consider the United States to be an ally?
Ukraine should still consider the people of the United States as an ally, absolutely. And those who are working to keep this support in place. But no, I think the American people have understood the sacrifice they've made and understand if they fall, other democratic countries will be the next victims. And our people, I think, are more aware of what's going on than some of our leaders.
Senator Jack Reed, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective today. Please come back and join us again soon. Coming up, Oval Office showdown. We are sticking with this breaking news story and the fallout as U.S.-Ukraine relations and the future of the war face an inflection point. Much more ahead. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As we've said, after that extraordinary moment in the Oval Office today, most Republicans are defending President Trump's handling of the situation. Nebraska Congressman Don Bacon, though, has been one of the few Republicans to condemn the meeting. He told me, quote, "This is a bad day for America's foreign policy. Ukraine wants independence, free markets, and rule of law. It wants to be part of the West. Russia hates us and our Western values. We should be clear that we stand for freedom." Joining me now is Susan Glasser, staff writer for The New Yorker. And with me on set is Simone Sanders Townsend, former senior advisor to Vice President Harris and co-host of The Weekend on MSNBC, and Danielle Pleka, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and an NBC News contributor. Thanks to all of you starting us off on this really significant day. Susan, let me go to you first. What do you think the message is from what happened today in the Oval Office, not just to Ukraine, but to the United States allies?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you see is really the very visible and almost painful manifestation of what's been unfolding for the last few weeks, which is Donald Trump essentially unilaterally changing American foreign policy. He is changing sides effectively in the Russia-Ukraine war. And, you know, we saw that a few days ago on the third anniversary of Russia's invasion, full-scale invasion of Ukraine. He had the United States vote on the side of Russia, North Korea, and Belarus against Ukraine and against most of our Western European allies. And so today was a very personal, pointed version of that flip-flop in geopolitics. You're seeing this extraordinary parade of European leaders in the aftermath of this Oval Office confrontation go publicly supporting Ukraine, say, we stand with you. And I fear that we're seeing not just a rift between the United States and Ukraine in the form of Trump and Zelenskyy, but a much wider rift between the United States and Europe. And remember, Donald Trump has been a longtime skeptic of the value of alliances, in particular, the value of NATO. His Vice President, J.D. Vance, who seemed to provoke the confrontation today in the Oval Office, again, skeptical both of Ukraine and of the value of American partnerships in Europe.
Danny, let me turn to you now here at the table. I want to talk about the point that Susan makes, which is there now a broader potential rift between the United States and its European allies? But, Danny, I want to start off by getting you to respond to something that Senator Jack Reed said. He said he thought this was orchestrated, that it was likely planned, that they wanted to put him in this position to potentially make him accept a deal down the line. What do you make of that suspicion that some people have. By the way, I've spoken to some officials who say that's not the case. This happened organically. What say you?
Well, I suspect that Jack Reed's insight into what's happening in the Trump White House is probably limited. Look, you know, we can conspiracy theorize all we want. Knowing what I know, and I've been very involved, and I work with people who've been very involved in these discussions between the United States and Ukraine, what I will say is if I had to assign blame to somebody for orchestrating anything, it would be the vice president. I think this is consistent with his ideology, his more recent ideology. I think it's consistent with what he suggested at a certain point in Munich, although at other times he suggested other things. And I think this is his crowd. This is the isolationist, we hang around with the great powers kind of a crowd. I don't think this is where the president was coming from, and nothing the president said up to that moment suggested that that was where he was coming from.
Yeah, I think it's really important to note that it went off the rails once. This was going to be over once President Trump spoke. You could see Zelenskyy was kind of like, but he didn't say anything. And then Vice President Vance jumped in and said, I just want to make a finer point. I want to say something else. And it was at that point when the vice president went on what was a little bit of a very extensive tirade, if you will, that positioned some of what we have heard from Vladimir Putin, that President Zelenskyy said, can I ask you, JD? And that's when I was like, oh, no. And that was an opportunity for President Trump to say, no, you can't. We're going to continue this in private. But instead, the cameras kept rolling, and you had Zelenskyy in a position that I don't think he's ever been in before, sitting in the Oval Office, a place where he has been a number of times, and a place where he has, frankly, had very tough conversations, just not in front of the cameras. And so the message to our allies, frankly, is that if this president and this vice president don't like what you're saying, don't like what you're doing, they will not have a problem berating you and belittling you and potentially humiliating you in public.
Danny?
Well, so I think you drew a very good picture of how this came out. I've been watching the show. I think I have a contrarian viewpoint about this. You know, look, I would like Donald Trump to not only say the right thing and do the right thing. I would like everybody. I'd like all of our presidents. I would like Biden to do the right thing on Ukraine as well. But at the end of the day, watch Zelenskyy, okay? Dude, you want something here, right? You want American support. You want American investment in your country. Do not do this. And lean forward and start telling the vice president in front of the camera how it is and how he ought to be. He did not handle this well, and I wish he had handled it differently.
Susan, let me let you jump in here about Zelenskyy's role and to part of the argument Danny's making. Look, I spoke to a White House official yesterday who said President Trump is going to be more measured in his tone. Don't expect him to accuse Zelenskyy of being a dictator, for example, again. What about this point that Danny's making right now?
Seems to me the White House official was giving you some very uncredible spin. I mean, I have to tell you that, you know, it's true that J.D. Vance, I absolutely agree with Danny that, you know, J.D. Vance has been, you know, kind of the leading proponent of a view of a very anti-Ukraine, anti-U.S. involvement in the world view of foreign policy. But what happened in the Oval Office today was extremely consistent with Donald Trump's years-long parroting of Russian lies, disinformation, and talking points about the war in Ukraine. By the way, lies and disinformation that predate Vladimir Zelenskyy being the president of Ukraine and go all the way back to his first term in office when he hosted Petro Poroshenko in the White House. And in a private meeting, according to his then ambassador to Ukraine, according to Poroshenko as well, whom I interviewed recently about this meeting, Donald Trump was, again, parroting Russian lies about whether Crimea was Russian, was telling the president of Ukraine to his face, well, you're just a corrupt country, and I know that because someone at Mar-a-Lago told me. So let's just be really clear that while the confrontation does appear today to be at least escalated in some way by J.D. Vance, that the views that we heard and the lies and disinformation that we heard from Donald Trump in that meeting are very consistent with who he is, and the policy that he has been pursuing here towards Ukraine. There's been a lot of disinformation. There have been a lot of people spinning you and other people, Republicans here, wishful thinking Europeans for understandable reasons, telling us that, oh, no, actually, Donald Trump was going to support Ukraine. That's not happening. And I think it's very hard for people to look this in the eye and to realize what are the consequences of the United States effectively switching sides in the world to be on the side of a dictator like Vladimir Putin.
Danny, is the U.S. switching sides to be on the side of a dictator? And John Bolton says yes. He says Trump and Vance have declared themselves to be on Russia's side in the Russia-Ukraine war. This is a catastrophic mistake for America's national security. And let's be clear, Trump and Vance now personally own that policy. It is not the view of a majority of Americans of either or no political party.
Look, I hope that's not true. I think it's hyperbolic. I know what Susan professes is a lie, that in fact Donald Trump was very excited about this deal. Now, again, you know, we all want people to.
I do think, though, the deal. When you say the deal, you mean the minerals deal.
The minerals deal,
which is different than peace.
Yeah, just so our audience knows, they were going to sign a minerals deal that would give 50% access to the U.S. Susan, jump in quickly, then let me let Danny finish.
I would not like to be mischaracterized on the air. I didn't say that anything about Donald Trump said it was a lie about the minerals deal. What I said was that Donald Trump spewed forth a lot of lies and misinformation in this meeting.
Yeah. Well, actually, what Susan said, I hope I'm not misquoting her, was that the White House was spinning you about how Donald Trump was going to handle this meeting. And I think, in fact, that was his full intention. Look, again, you know, a lot of us who live in Washington, and especially those of us who are in the foreign policy community, we like those nice UN votes, okay? We like a nice UN vote. We like a nice ambassador. We like a president who kind of says the right thing, because we know that Putin is a rotten dictator who invaded another country, sides with Iran, North Korea, China, and is our enemy. Forget Ukraine, our enemy, right? So we know all those things. At the end of the day, we have the president we have. And it's important to understand that if he sees the way to handle Putin as doing things differently, if he sees the way to begin a relationship with Ukraine fresh, not on the back of the U.S. taxpayer, via this mineral deal that you described, then that's a way to get there as well. And the problem is we spend so much time worrying about the things that don't matter. Sure, it stinks when we vote with the wrong people at the UN. At the end of the day, as Israel knows all too well, who cares how the UN votes?
Can I just say that is very concerning to hear. It does matter how the UN votes, and it matters.
Never in a million years.
As some of these work at the White House, I believe that it does matter. Let me just say this. The minerals deal would be the United States getting something from Ukraine. It would be a give from Ukraine to the president. So what Donald Trump was excited about today was the minerals deal. He's never talked about being excited about peace. He said today that, oh, how can I criticize Putin and then say, oh, how's the deal going? He has no problem criticizing Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
Today.
And so I think, to Susan's point, it is very important to underscore here that the president is being very clear about who he thinks deserves criticism and berating and raking over the proverbial coals, and who deserves demure language. And the person that he believes deserves berating is the person whose country was invaded and whose sovereignty was trampled on, not the aggressor. And the aggressor is Vladimir Putin. And that is a fact.
Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I do think that the question remains, will this scramble the United States alliances with its allies, to the point that really all of you are making. Thank you so much for a very fiery conversation today. Appreciate it. Susan, Simone, and Danielle, fantastic. We will be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Trump administration is facing more pushback from the courts over its effort to slash the federal workforce, even as it moves forward with additional cuts. The latest target, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. The White House informed hundreds of probationary employees at the agency, which includes the National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Center, that they were being let go late yesterday. That came on the same day a federal judge called the mass firings of federal employees illegal and ordered the Trump administration to rescind a memo directing agencies to determine which workers should be fired. The ruling does not reinstate workers who have already been laid off. Now, this was the scene this afternoon in Detroit, where some of those federal employees who'd been let go held a rally outside a VA medical center where they had worked. The VA dismissed more than 1,400 probationary employees this week. NBC News correspondent Shaq Brewster joins me now from Detroit. So, Shaq, you've been talking to those who are out there who are protesting. Set the scene for us. What are folks telling you?
Look, a lot of them are upset, and they're upset at their own situation, the prospect of not having a job. But many of them pointed back to the veterans who they serve inside the hospital, despite them being veterans themselves. You had one person tell me they went to work on Tuesday. She was a greeter at the VA hospital in Ann Arbor and wasn't able to help veterans with their cars or their transportation after their appointment. Another saying that she was the only kind of physical therapist in that hospital, and now there's no one else to help them do the specialized treatment that she has. The VA, when you listen to what the Department of Veteran Affairs is saying, is essentially this was a move to save money. They say that this latest round is saving about $83 million a year. And the VA secretary is saying, while it's heartbreaking, this is something that they believe will help them better allocate resources. But a lot of the people out there, Kristen, are essentially saying that even if we needed to be cut, even if this position wasn't mission critical, as the VA is saying, there's a better way to go about it to make sure that the people that they're serving aren't also on the line for them not being there any longer.
All right, Shaq Brewster, I know you'll continue to follow it for us. Thank you so much for that update and for being there. Really appreciate it. Still to come, Putin's endgame. A new documentary takes a deep dive into the Russian president's goals beyond Ukraine. The journalist behind that documentary, former NBC News employees and our colleagues, they're going to join us. Stay with us. Meet the Press Now continues. Welcome back. As we've been covering throughout this hour, President Trump and President Zelenskyy had a fiery meeting at the White House today, a meeting many Europeans were hoping would pave the way for a better working relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine. Following the meeting, several European leaders took to social media to voice their continued support for Ukraine as the future of the war in Ukraine hangs in the balance. Now, a new documentary from the Atlantic Council titled Putin's Endgame, The Stakes Beyond Ukraine, looks at what it means for NATO if Putin succeeds in Ukraine.
Deep in the forests of Finland, they are keenly aware of present and past tensions with their Russian neighbor. There's been a border here in places since the 1500s, often a flashpoint for incursion and dispute.
Of course.
It is Matti Pitkanini's job to patrol this border in the Karelia region of Finland.
What do you think is going to happen if Russia wins in Ukraine?
That is, I think, $1 million question. Maybe if I can answer to you with a question. Have you ever met a millionaire who, after earning his or her first million, has said that this is enough, I don't want any more? I don't think so.
Wow, just chilling there. Joining me now is the film's director, Joel Seidman, and Kevin Tibbles, who was the reporter for the documentary. Both are former colleagues of ours right here at NBC News. Congratulations to both of you. Thank you both for coming back to share this documentary with us. We really appreciate it. Kevin, I want to start with you. And in light of this documentary and the work that you did on it, what was your reaction to what happened today in the Oval Office?
Well, I think that there has been a tremendous shiver run up the spine of every country that is on the border with Russia at this point in time. We were in Finland and Sweden, for example, two countries that decided to leave the world of non-aligned nations and neutrality to join NATO as a result of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And then there's Estonia, tiny little Estonia, sitting there with the other Baltic states, Lithuania and Latvia. And they are sitting there knowing full well what it's like to be under the Russian boot, because, of course, during the Soviet times, they all were. And I think that the fact that we were asking, I think Joel can expand on this as well, we were actually asking a rhetorical question. What do you think is going to happen if Putin wins Ukraine? I don't think anyone actually thought that that would ever happen. I think that has all changed as of today.
Well, Kevin, you take me to Joel. You were asking that what you thought was a rhetorical question. Has it now changed?
I think it has. I've been hearing from the foreign ministers of the 3 countries that we have visited, Sweden, Finland, and Estonia. All of them are standing with Zelenskyy. All of them are standing with Ukraine. But their biggest fear, and I've talked to the ambassadors here in Washington in the last week, their biggest fear is they may have to go it alone. They may have to defend themselves without the U.S. umbrella. And I think that is something that is perturbing them in terms of, can they actually do it? And the other question is, Stormer was here just the other day, and he said that he was willing to put British troops on the ground in Ukraine. That's a really big effort to do it. And you heard the president today say, and he brought up the World War III idea. To have NATO troops in Ukraine now is incredibly risky. But the most important thing is, will this embolden Vladimir Putin? Will he feel that the ability to hold territory that he's taken aggressively through an invasion will give him the opportunity to move into places that he's always wanted again?
I think that that is the key question. When I spoke with President Zelenskyy just a few weeks ago, he told me that he has intelligence that the Russians are amassing troops in Belarus, and he is concerned, and Ukraine had concerns, that Russia is eyeing going into neighboring NATO nations. What was your sense of that based on your work in this documentary?
Our sense is that the Baltics are very vulnerable. We were at a place called Narva, which is the easternmost point of the NATO alliance. It is literally across a river from Russia. And the people of Narva knew full well that Putin, just a year ago, said that he would like to take Narva, because Narva is very similar to the Donbass. 95% of its population speak Russian. They cross a bridge that's something right out of the Cold War, a pedestrian bridge, to go shopping across the river because things are actually cheaper in Russia. But will that be a vulnerable spot? I think it's very possible.
Kevin, let me bring you back in here, because part of what you and Joel looked at in this documentary were the hybrid warfare tactics that the Russians used in the Baltic Sea and along the borders of Finland and Estonia. Talk to us about that. What did you discover there?
Well, I think, Kristen, it's all about destabilizing societies. That's what this hybrid warfare is. There's another word for it, simply sabotage. We have heard the stories of ships, either Chinese ships or ghost ships, that are traveling through the Baltic, dragging their anchors, ripping out communications cables and the like. And this is happening with quite some frequency now. Now, of course, Finland, the other NATO nations are now stopping these ships, boarding them, but it is all aimed at making people uneasy, destabilizing societies, as I said. They're in Estonia, for example, they're jamming radio signals and GPS. Sometimes planes can't land at the airport as a result of that. Once again, more nerves, more frayed edges. And this is part and parcel to what took place in Ukraine prior to the invasion of Ukraine. You're talking about amassing troops in Belarus. We're just following the same pattern.
Well, we are unfortunately out of time, but we really appreciated an incredible work on this documentary. Thanks to both of you, Joel Seidman, Kevin Tibbles. We really appreciate it. It's great to see both of you again. We will be back Monday with more Meet the Press Now. And if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press on your local NBC News station. I'll have interviews with Senator Bernie Sanders, Speaker Mike Johnson, and Senator James Lankford. The news continues with Yasmin Vesuvian in for Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or follow us on social media.